Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, August 8th, 2025, and our friends Harry Johnson and Colonel Wilkerson are back with us. Welcome back.
Glad to
Good
be
to be
here.
here. Yep.
Good,
Lynn,
good shirt, and the audience is out there waiting. So, well, how's the shirt competition going?
uh, they're going to vote. Let's see who's going to win.
Yeah, we got to have something to lighten the mood because everything else is so damn grim.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the truth.
Yeah. Let me start with what's going on in Lebanon. They're trying to do everything, Colonel, to corner Hezbollah and disarm Hezbollah. But we know what's going on in Lebanon. I talked with Laith Marouf. He's living in Beirut, and he reports on the issues on the issue of Palestine and what's going on in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon. He mentioned that the majority, many people in the army of Lebanon are Shia. You know, when it comes to the government goes against Hezbollah is somehow a losing hand if they go in that direction. What's your take on what's happening in Lebanon in terms of the way that Hezbollah is resisting, the way that the government is pushing for disarmament of Hezbollah?
Well, what's happening is a result of the United States, and in particular its intelligence agents, doing a billion-plus embassy we built there, and in essence carrying out U.S. policy with regard to Lebanon. Let me back up a minute and say, regardless of what we think of Assad and his father, when Syria occupied ostensibly or really a large portion of Lebanon or the territory around Lebanon, it was far more stable. I mean, it was far more stable. That's gone now. And what's trying to replace it, of course, is the dominant aggressor in the region, Israel. And Hezbollah was there under Nasrallah doing a pretty good job of kind of balancing all of that. When Israel killed him and when Assad fell, that took all of that stability that was artificial, if you will, but nonetheless worked out of Lebanon. And so now we have an element that is ostensibly supported by the United States with arms and other things, intelligence sharing, for example, at war with part of its own body politic called Hezbollah, now somewhat diminished. But I think Larry can answer this better than I. I'm hearing that they have more or less reestablished a substantial portion of their supply lines, and they are getting equipment again. They're getting missiles, they're getting ammunition, and so forth. I also hear that they've reestablished their lead. They don't have any problem reestablishing leadership. They have a guy ready to step into every position when the Israelis kill somebody per force because of the Israeli technique, which is to assassinate your leaders one after the other. So they do have a pretty good leadership chain. They're diminished somewhat in what they can do, but they're still formidable. And we don't like that. And of course, Netanyahu doesn't like that either. And I've said all along, Netanyahu wants Lebanon. He wants the whole freaking country, but at a minimum, he wants the South and the water and what he's got his hands on right now. There has not been a ceasefire in Lebanon since the ceasefire was declared. Israel has killed someone or someone's, plural, almost every day of that so-called ceasefire. That's what Bibi thinks. I asked someone the other day, how do you say ceasefire in Hebrew? Because it clearly doesn't mean the same thing it does in English, because he doesn't honor any ceasefire. So he's still at war there. And he's just declared that he's going back and he's going to destroy Hezbollah in addition to finishing off Gaza and occupying Gaza with the IDF, which is going to cause him enormous problems. Long answer. Larry can probably handle the intel aspects of it better than I.
Go ahead, Larry. Your take on that.
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm watching the movie Groundhog Day, which featured Bill Murray, and every day he woke up, it was the same day again. And the United States meddling in Lebanon. It's been, we really helped the place come apart in the 1980s, and this tension that exists between the Christians and the Shia is, it's been long standing, and we've helped pour the gasoline on that fire and letting it burn quite hot at times. Syria, previously it was a curious relationship. The Syrian government and on the intelligence and military side were penetrated by Mossad. Yet the intelligence and military side of the house in Syria facilitated Iran's supply line to Hezbollah. Now that that's gone away, Israel doesn't have the same penetration of the Syrian government that it had previously. And the government of al-Shara is not really in firm control of the country. If anything, it's devolved now into these clans, into these various tribal groups, mafia organizations, criminal organizations. So it's through those networks that Hezbollah is reconstructing its, let's call it the rat line to Iran. Because ultimately, the creation of Hezbollah was a direct consequence of the Iranian Revolution, in the sense that the rise of the Ayatollah Khomeini was seen as the spiritual leader of the Shia people, and he was an influential figure. So that explains why Iran's involvement, historically there. It's religious. I think this U.S. envoy Tom Barrack, who is carrying the water on this thing, trying to get the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah, all he's doing is lighting a fuse that's going to set off a civil war. And Hezbollah will still be here a year from now and 5 years from now. So this is, again, the United States. We don't have a learning curve. A learning curve implies that you can actually learn something and draw upon past experience, so you don't repeat the same mistakes. Yeah, we are condemned to do the same stupid thing over and over.
I think that stupid thing is purposeful, though. I think we want a civil war.
Yeah,
We'd love to have the Christians dominant, but we want a civil war in lieu of that.
Colonel, what you've mentioned, I think, is the key. Do you want to add something, Larry?
No, I just said,
Okay.
I agree with Larry that we just don't. We just love making this.
Yeah.
Well,
Colonel, what is?
I think he froze.
Yeah, can you hear us, Colonel?
Yeah, he may need to.
Yeah,
he's coming back a little bit. StreamYard.
I hear.
There he
I
is.
hear you fine.
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
It's
my Cox. It's my Christian's wireless is terrible.
Yeah.
I have to. I'll switch over to TNT.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
So
you're
good.
back. You're
Okay.
back, Colonel. But it seems that the internet, your connection is not that good. It's because you're going somehow you disconnect, connect, and something instability in your connection.
Let me go to AT&T then.
Okay.
I'll leave you for a second.
Okay.
Him when I get back.
Larry, what's happening when you follow the Iranian media? It seems that in the eyes of Iranians, Hezbollah is ready. Is just they could achieve what they wanted to achieve, because in the aftermath of those assassinations, that was huge, if you assume that. And they have somehow fixed all of those issues, and they're prepared to any sort of conflict with Israel. Even we had the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qassem. He came out and said that they're ready for all-out war with Israel if they want to attack. How do you see Hezbollah? Do you think that if Hezbollah is ready to go in that direction, how about the government in Lebanon? Why do they need to go against Hezbollah? when Israel is attacking the southern part of Lebanon?
Well, they've been persuaded to support Trump in the United States, and frankly, they're trying to keep Israel from attacking them, and they feel the best way to do that is get firmly on board with the U.S. side. What so many in the United States fail to appreciate, they view Hezbollah as a sort of a cartoon terrorist organization. In other words, it fits the Hollywood stereotype of these crazed terrorists. But Hezbollah is really a de facto government in southern Lebanon, because the social services they provide, everything from feeding people to healthcare. So I mean, it's a comprehensive organization, and it's organic. And what I mean by organic, it's not artificial. It's not an artificial creation. It flows naturally out of the familial relationships, which are also part of the religious element. So, like I said, we've been through this before, and Israel's, countless invasions. They've been murdering and assassinating Hezbollah leaders for 40 years. So, and Hezbollah has not gone away, and it's not going away this time. I think this is just another going to be failed attempt by Trump to carry water for Israel, for the Zionist cause, and it's going to create further chaos. Now, maybe I think Colonel Wilkerson was alluding to this. The United States maybe that's what we want, to stir up chaos. Recall that in 1981. We were providing support to both Iran and Iraq, even though we would encourage Iraq to attack Iran. We were playing both sides, because we had a vested interest in having them kill each other, and we saw it also as a way to weaken Russia. So we haven't changed.
And just to add to what Larry said about Hezbollah, they're a better government. They deliver social services better. And they were gaining political power, significant political power, because of that, which is one reason why we had to unleash the Israelis on them.
Colonel, when you talk about the government in Lebanon, we know that the government they don't have that much of experience. It was yesterday they came to power, and they're trying to do something in Lebanon. How in the world can someone imagine that they can go against Hezbollah that has a lot of roots within the society, within the political parties? There's so much. I've mentioned within the army of Lebanon, they have a lot of connection. And is that the push? Do you think that the government is seen as a viable choice to go against Hezbollah, or because of the pressure that they're receiving, they're behaving this way?
Well, it doesn't matter whether they're a viable choice or not. The United States is going to do it, because I think, as I said before, ultimately the United States' goal there is chaos that Israel will ultimately fix.
Yeah. The other thing is
problem with that, Nima. The problem with that, of course, the challenge there, which is becoming a humongous challenge every hour that goes by, is that Israel's commitment on so many different fronts is wearing them out.
Yeah.
And you're going to see that big time as the military leadership ultimately objects strenuously to what Netanyahu has just ordered, that they will be the occupier of Gaza ad nauseum. And they come to blows within their own ranks over that, ultimately. And we have to put troops on the ground, God forbid.
Larry, the situation in Syria is somehow indicating the future for Hezbollah and the administration, I would assume, in Lebanon, because even with al-Jolani, he's trying to do everything to get closer to somehow to get closer to the government in Israel, to say them everything's fine, let's talk, let's be closer, let's find some common ground to work on. But after all, Netanyahu and his administration, they don't they're not going to be satisfied with this situation. They attacked, even they wanted to kill al-Jolani in Damascus. They tried to kill him. You know, when I don't know what's going on in the mind of Hezbollah right now, because when they see this, they don't like any of them. But when they see the situation with the Israelis, they never would disarm, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, we like to think of Hezbollah as suicide bombers, but they're not going to commit suicide here. They got to retain the weapons. The Syria, again, this is part of the West, let's call it the deep state plan in the West, between the Brits, MI6, and CIA, that they thought that they could come in and, take down Assad, and then that would put the United States in firmer control. And, this also is, they were coordinating with Turkey, but what they forgot is Erdogan's got his, he's got his own plans and ambitions in mind. And none of it's worked out as either Turkey or the West had hoped. Al-Shara, aka al-Jolani, is just, I call him a figurehead, because he does not have a base of popular support throughout the country. And he certainly doesn't have the appeal to be able to bring in the Kurds and the Druze and the Shia, which, significant. These are significant communities that aren't going to go away. So within that, we've actually sort of turned Syria into Lebanon, is what the West has accomplished. Yeah. Only a more lethal version of it. The only good news this week was that Trump supposedly is making good on his promises, closed down 3 of the U.S. military bases and withdrawing U.S. forces. I haven't seen that confirmed, but that's the report. Hope it's true. But this, we've set up Syria for continued civil war. It's not going to go away soon. And the notion, as Colonel Wilkerson correctly noted, Israel does not have unlimited manpower resources. And to be militarily engaged, they're going to try to occupy Gaza. They're still carrying out military operations in the West Bank. They're carrying out military operations in southern Lebanon. And then to be stretched out and have to protect in the Golan Heights. This is, frankly, if the United States military would be hard pressed to carry out all 4 of those missions. And this really does have the potential to push Israel to a breaking point.
Actually, Colonel Netanyahu said that he intends to reoccupy Gaza again. And I don't know if the United States, if Donald Trump would agree on that issue with him.
Well, the Knesset approved it. And apparently what I heard last night was that he's had a conversation with someone, Witkoff or someone, maybe even Trump himself. I also heard that Trump yelled at him rather viciously over the phone. Of course, that didn't mean much for Donald, about the starvation, saying that he had seen it. He had actually seen the starvation, I assume videos or whatever. Maybe he's been watching Tucker Carlson interview Tony Aguilar. Hard to dispute that. Yeah. So my great fear now is, and I've had military people sending me emails here in the last 24 hours, their great fear too is that we're going to wind up bailing the IDF's butt out by putting troops in the Gaza Strip in order, we will say, to ensure the starvation ceases and the people get fed.
Larry, here is what Netanyahu said in his recent interview with Fox News about the genocide.
Rafah, near the Sinai Desert in Egypt, and that town has been flattened. And you have been accused of genocide. How do you respond to that?
Well, if, as Ambassador Huckabee said, if we're practicing genocide, we're surely doing a very bad job of it, because we could have, basically eliminated the entire population of Gaza, but we went the other direction. We did something that no army in history ever did. We're supplying humanitarian food to the enemy's population, because we distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. We put in 2 million tons of food. I mean, if we wanted to commit genocide, we wouldn't give 2 million tons of food to the population. And also, the reason you see the flattened buildings is because Hamas booby traps every single building. So when we come in, we first have the population moved, even though Hamas tries to keep them in the combat zones. But after they move, and we start to move into the neighborhoods that are now populated only by terrorists, they ignite these booby traps. So what we do is we put in an APC, an armored personnel carrier, with a lot of explosives, detonate it. It sets off all the booby traps, and the buildings begin to collapse as a result of that. They're empty buildings. They're not populated buildings.
And the guy is trying to blame everything on Hamas. And
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And if you name it, the most, I won't say the most objectionable, the death is the most objectionable thing, but if you take the United States Army's template for battle damage assessment, which takes into consideration dozens of parameters, including the type of rebar used in the buildings, the kind of concrete used in the buildings, everything you can possibly talk about, Palantir and Mosaic, you pack everything possible in this, lots of different things. And then you assess what your BDA is. It's become a science, and it's close, and we've done it on battlefields where we were able to get in afterwards and verify how close it really is. If you apply that to the small territory that is Gaza, you get 250,000 people already dead. Not 59,000, not 60,000, 200,000+ people, half of whom are women and children. And I should say a considerable number of old people too. That's what you get. So Bibi, you're telling me Hamas killed all these people with the booby traps and everything? Oh, and by the way, why did you need all those 250, 500-pound and even 2,000-pound bombs? And why did you drop all those bombs if all these things you just talked about are true? You're a lying sack of shit. Sorry. You're a lying sack of shit.
Larry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, actually, that interview is a sign of Israel's is in trouble, because up to this, I don't think you've seen any Fox News reporters actually being let into Gaza to film like this until now. And why is that? Well, the number of European countries now lining up to say they're going to recognize Palestine as a state is increasing. The criticism coming out of the European countries towards Israel is increasing. And so why is that relevant? Well, when you look at Israel's trading partners, both in terms of who it exports to, who it imports from, Europe is still a major player on the economic front. What I was surprised to discover, though, was that Russia, China, and India also have trade relations with Israel. And, frankly, I think the BRICS countries could do a hell of a lot more in putting pressure on Israel to stop this. And what it would take is some ultimatums being delivered to Bibi by various countries that you either stop the genocide or we're breaking relations with you. We're recalling our ambassador. We're kicking your diplomatic personnel out of our country. We're imposing tariffs on anything that you export. And we're going to restrict any imports or anything. Our exports to you are going to be curtailed, particularly if they involve anything that can be used in a lethal manner. So the fact that Bibi sat down with the Fox News reporter was an example of they're trying to do damage repair in the United States. That wasn't for international consumption. That was, they recognize they've even got problems in the United States, and they're trying to do repair among the best. What, genocide? What genocide? Ha ha ha! We're pretty bad at it. I mean, it's obscene. We've seen the images of the bombs being dropped on apartment buildings, and we've seen the bodies of mangled children crushed under the weight of concrete. These are not fabrications. These aren't artificial intelligence images created. This is what Israel's been doing now. We're coming up on 22 months now, and they have failed to defeat Hamas. And now their solution is, we're going to go occupy Gaza. Good luck with that, because the logistics requirements for Israel to go in and sustain that operation, it's going to further stress the system, and it's going to create more targets. I think you're going to see the casualty rate among Israeli reservists go up. And again, part of the problem we haven't pointed out is the reservists in the Israeli army. I mean, they're incompetent. They really are. They're not professional soldiers by any stretch, and they're usually under the I don't even want to say under the guidance of officers who are incompetent, but they are. So they're not. It's a mob, and then no wonder they go out and engage in one war crime after another. And this is why you're seeing when the reservists go home after 90 days, they're putting a gun in their mouth and eating a bullet, or they're overdosing on pills. This is only going to accelerate.
And Nima, I'd like to point something out too that I just found out about maybe 48 hours ago. There's a movement, and it's typical what you might call humanitarian effort that was going to fail, that sort of thing. But it's stunning what they have gotten going in terms of, and Larry was just talking, I think this is one reason they use Fox News for this interview. There is a thing in the UN Charter which has rarely been used. If I recall, we used it in the first Gulf War, and Kofi Annan went along with it. We didn't really need it, but we went along and did it. It's called Chapter 7. And you have Chapter 6, which is the standard kind of peacekeeping operation, the ones we see all over the world, some of which are, as you might say, the one in Lebanon is useless. But nonetheless, you do have Chapter 7, which is peace enforcement. Peace enforcement means you go in and your ROE, your rules of engagement, allow you to shoot the bastards if they don't comply with what you're trying to achieve. We tried this in the Balkans, and we had some really sorry European leaders, in my view, that wouldn't allow the ROE to be implemented. And so UNPROFOR and its adjuncts proved to be very feckless in the Balkans. But if you did a Chapter 7 and you marshaled Chinese troops, Indian troops, oh, wow, wouldn't that be interesting? Pakistani troops, Turkish troops, Fijian troops. Fiji sends some of the best soldiers on this earth to UN operations. Very small contingents, but they're good soldiers. If you send let's say a couple 100,000, you could stop this. And guess what? The UN General Assembly only needs a 2/3 vote in order to do this. UNSC can't do anything about it. They can protest, can't do anything about it. The problem is getting the countries to commit the troops. So if you were able to do that and put that many troops on the ground and have those troops have ROE that said, if you come another step, I'm going to shoot you. Peace is coming to this area. And we're going to make sure that in that peace, however interim it might be, we feed these starving people. That's the kind of thing that should happen. That's the kind of thing that Eisenhower envisioned with that Chapter 7 provision. Well, will never happen. But that shows you how negligent the world is with regard to this genocide. Go back and look at the Spanish Civil War and look at all the money we made off Hitler's killing people in Spain. Go back and look at any conflict and you'll see that no one is ever going to implement this very powerful provision of the United Nations. One, because it also provided for a standing force of 100,000 or more, and the United States wouldn't commit. That's what would have made this provision really electric and maybe usable. You wouldn't have to gather the forces. They would already be there and ready to go because they belong to the UN. Oh, no, the United States Congress would be so angry about that, surrendering sovereignty to the United Nations. But that was the original concept. And we have let that go to hell. Don't even tell me the UN has any power when it can't do something about what's happening in Gaza, even to the point that it should dismiss Israel from the United Nations.
Yeah.
Should have done that a long time ago.
Yeah.
Laurie, the cases against Netanyahu in Israel are just somehow increasing. The latest would be what has happened on October 7th. And these people, these soldiers are coming out talking about what has happened in that day. And recently we had General Flynn on podcast with Steve Bannon. He was talking about it. Here is what he said.
Nations, and there's got to be some big problems right now internal, and Netanyahu's dealing with it with the IDF. They're going to have to do some soul searching, and I mean immediate soul searching, because the 7th of October was a date, that they still have not been able to, and there's an investigation going on, and I've already heard from some of the soldiers that were told to stand down and the exact hours. So something bad happened, and it was an inside thing. I don't know, again, that's a bombshell right there. So the internal situation in Israel has got to be done with a
hold it, hang on, whoa, hang on, you can't drop a bomb like that. Mike Flynn, your former head of DIA, first national security advisor, President Trump, a revered figure globally. You're saying your sources are telling you on the investigation that they're trying to slow down and slow walk over there because we're coming up on the 2nd anniversary of it. You're saying that you're hearing there's testimony or documents or actual evidence that certain elements of the Israeli military were told to stand down? Because I know from people I know, this is a very contentious area and it's going to be explosive. Are you hearing the same thing?
Steve, you can go back to interviews that I did like the next day and the following week after October 7th in multiple broad alternative media, where I said something went wrong. Because, Steve, I have personally walked that border. I have been down at those areas, and I know the details of how the Israelis, one of the most secure borders in the world, how they do their operations. So I know that. So something broke down, and it wasn't because of mistakes. So that's number one. This internal machinations that are going on right now, what's going to have to happen? They're going to have to come to grips with this, because I'm going to tell you, the American people, they're getting tired of it. They're getting tired of this constant, Israel. I mean, I'm the biggest fan. I would, I have been to Israel many times. I have, served alongside them. I have done things with them, certainly on the intelligence side. So I'm their biggest fan. But the American people are not. And the American people are so tired of all of the craziness and our involvement in these things.
Yeah. So he's accurately reading the room. It's what's significant about what Mike is saying is you could have classified him as a strong Zionist prior to this.
Yeah.
Very much anti-Iranian. He the book, he wrote a book with one of the most, prominent anti-Iranian critics. So the fact that, Mike Flynn is now, setting off the red flare about this obsession of catering to Israel, it's becoming a political problem in the United States. Thank God. It's about time America frees itself from the grip of this Zionist lobby. And it's been enabled, and it's continuing to be enabled by these Christian evangelicals who embrace the Zionist mythology that, this is that God gave this land to Israel and that we must support it because God says if you support Israel, you'll be blessed. It's all it's all both not only a misinterpretation of Scripture, but it's also putting one's faith in a book that was written, 3,000 years ago, while a bunch of Jewish scholars were in captivity in what's now like Tehran. It was Babylon back then. So when Flynn is saying this, again, it's just another sign of how the worm is turning against the Zionist cause. And as it turns, you're getting increasingly desperate moves by people like Netanyahu, because their international support is eroding now at a greater pace. And I firmly believe, as I mentioned earlier, if there is diplomatic and economic action that countries can take that would bring this thing to a halt. And I criticize China, Russia, and India as strongly as the other countries for their inaction, their failure to do that. They're allowing this to go on.
Let's throw Turkey in there too. I just read they just dumped an incredible amount of oil on Israel.
Colonel,
and it's intriguing that they're using Fox News, very intriguing, and using Bannon, because that's supposed to be the mouthpiece for Trump.
Yeah.
And that's happening with Epstein to a certain extent too. Maybe Tucker Carlson is a cast-off from Fox News, but these two issues are going to eat Trump's lunch.
Oh, well, actually, I about fell out of bed when I read this thing this morning. The Israeli government now is embracing Candace Owens because she's going after Macron in France, because Brigitte is a dude. And notice that up until like 2 days ago, Candace Owens was being vilified in Israel as an anti-Semite because she also is a harsh critic of Zion. So, I mean, this shows you how crazy it's getting over there. Yeah. Now they're celebrating Candace Owens because she's attacking Macron, because Macron's calling for a Palestinian state. I mean, it's just...
They're meeting themselves, coming and going.
Yeah. I hollered at my wife, bring the popcorn. I got to eat some popcorn here while I watch this, shit show unfold.
And if you've been watching Colbert and these other comics like Jon Stewart and so forth, they are just ripping the Epstein case up. I mean, their satire is getting deadly, and you wonder what they're going to come up with next.
Yeah. Well, we saw it gets a little off topic, but the fact that Epstein was an FBI informant tells us now that's how he got killed. I guarantee, I have little doubt that the FBI had him whacked in jail because he was going to divulge what the FBI knew and what its involvement was with the whole Epstein affair. But that gets us all. But then through Epstein, we get back to Mossad.
Yep.
And Israeli intelligence operations, which have been designed to try to maintain control over all these Western leaders, so that they will back Israel, so they'll have the firm backing of the West, and that is unraveling now.
Yeah, it seems that AIPAC is trying so hard to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene, and here is what she said, Colonel. She had an interview with Matt Gaetz.
Reaction to AIPAC's fundraising emails attacking you?
Yeah, Matt, I'll go ahead and be straight and honest about this. I'm absolutely furious. And as a matter of fact, AIPAC needs to register as a foreign lobbyist because they're breaking U.S. laws by donating to members of Congress and by taking them on a fully funded trip to Israel every single freshman member of Congress's year. They just took them over just recently and had them meet with the Prime Minister of Israel. But let's frame that correctly. They take them over to meet with the secular government of nuclear-armed Israel. Israel, who is in less than $400 billion in debt. Israel, who has taxpayer-funded health care in college. Israel is not hurting, and they've already proven that they are more than capable of not only defending themselves, but annihilating their enemies to the point of genocide. And that's what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah, we are seeing two what?
Go, Georgia girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, two the two were supporting Donald Trump during the election, and they're supporting I would assume that I would say that they supported the way that they brought a lot of people into the campaign. Marjorie Taylor Greene had some sort of great influence on what has happened for Donald Trump. But how do you see these people are getting away from him? Just somehow they don't understand their policy anymore. Carl.
The rats are leaving the sinking ship in many respects, I think. And I've listened to Green a couple of other times than what you played there, actually half a dozen other times. I think she's actually awakened to the danger. And she's let her scruples otherwise be put aside for the moment because she is awakened to the danger. I'm not sure that she and Massey haven't talked extensively too. And Tom is very influential in this sort of thing. And when he gets you with specifics, and he hammers them home. Specifics about how broken the legislature is, particularly with regard to the war power, even with the war power resolution, which he will readily admit, something I've said all along, few people admit to, that was unconstitutional. The war power resolution was unconstitutional. It put limits on what the Constitution said was the war power, which is solely in the Congress of the United States. And the resolution watered that down a little bit. And that, that's another matter altogether. But Massey's an expert on that. And when he starts talking to you, it's hard to really argue with him. And he's spreading that influence very slowly across the House, at least. And I think there are going to be more people. I hope there are going to be more people who awaken to the fact that the legislature is no longer a check on the executive branch at all.
And add to that, with podcast, I mentioned Candace Owens, she's got 4.5 million subscribers. Okay. That's more people that watch MSNBC and CNN combined. Maybe competitive with Fox News, just her alone. Tucker Carlson. They've both been doing podcasts and shows. Tucker in particular over the last week and a half. First he had John Mearsheimer on twice, and he had Mearsheimer on just yesterday to to talk about the history of Israel becoming a nation, and Judge Napolitano did that as well with Mearsheimer. Then Mearsheimer's critique of Israel with Tucker was followed up by him having Colonel Aguilar on that we've talked about, the colonel who witnessed the war crimes underway in the feeding centers in Gaza. And then Tucker had him back on for a sit down in this. The first one was done remote, like we're doing on Zoom. But the second one, he flew him up to Maine, put him in the studio, and he went through all the efforts that are being made to discredit him. Now, this information is seeping out to the MAGA base. And while it's, some aren't persuaded, it is persuading an increased number. And in fact, Candace Owens is becoming increasingly hostile towards Donald Trump, accusing him now of becoming part of the deep state and saying, what happened to this America First guy? And it's becoming a sort of the refrain, what happened to America first? Why is it Israel first? And this is creating a problem for the Republicans and for the Democrats.
I agree with that 100%. And I just say it's also becoming Ukraine first.
Yeah.
Which totally opposite of what Trump promised.
Yeah.
Here is, Carl, what Marjorie Taylor Greene said about Iran.
6 months in, Steve, and here we are turning back on the campaign promises, and we bombed Iran on behalf of Israel. Yes, it was on behalf of Israel. We're entering a nuclear war, the World War III, because the entire world is going to erupt. And you want to know the people that are cheering it on right now? Their tune is going to drastically change the minute we start seeing flag draped coffins on the nightly news, on Fox News that brainwashes all the baby boomers, and on CNN that brainwashes all the Democrat baby boomers. And that is exactly how this is going to go down.
Yeah.
This woman has eaten some brain pills.
Yeah. Oh.
Larry, Donald Trump said he had a meeting with Netanyahu, and he said that so Iran's nuclear program is obliterated, and let's go after Abraham Accords. And do you? It seems to me that he feels somehow he's in a position that he can reach that sort of agreement. Do you feel any sort of sign of that happening?
He's delusional. Again, I think he's mentioned before. He's a confabulator. He says things that he genuinely believes in, but what he's saying is false. So yeah, we were hearing 2 months ago that we've got all these countries lined up ready to go on the Abraham Accord. No, it didn't. We heard in February all the countries of the world were lined up to kiss his ass on tariffs and trade. That didn't happen. So this notion, the Abraham Accords are dead. They're not going anywhere until the Zionists stop killing the Palestinians. Because while I don't believe Saudi Arabia and the Qataris or the Emiratis are any kind of honorable people, nonetheless, I think they even recognize that anything to climb into bed with Israel at this point, doing what they're doing, would unleash some fury in the streets against them.
Carl, your take? Do you feel that? Do you feel the same way?
I do. Yeah, I can't say it any better. And I do think the street in the Arab countries is becoming a factor that they have to take into consideration. I think they thought at first they could just disregard it, but I think it is becoming a factor.
Yeah,
I think it is particularly a factor in Egypt. It's just not very well reported on. Egypt has a problem right now with its own people in terms of feeding them, watering them, and giving them jobs and so forth. Traditional problems that existed under Mubarak too, but they've become exacerbated, and they become exacerbated in part because Egypt's got a lot of people there now that didn't have then. They've got their own massive refugee influx and, of course, normal birth rates. So it's a real Egypt could fall apart at any minute.
Larry, there was a meeting between Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin. And Donald Trump later on tweeted that it was positive. We're going to get in somewhere. We're going to meet. And your take on that, what is going on in the mind of Trump? Because for me, when I look at the situation in Ukraine, what's going on in Ukraine, and the way that Donald Trump is talking about it is two different realities.
Yeah.
I don't see the deep understanding of what's going on in Ukraine to be represented by Donald Trump, to be the basis, to be the foundation of any sort of talk between the two presidents. Because usually you have to have technical teams to talk with each other,
right?
And they formalize it by your meeting with Vladimir Putin, but you don't see that happening.
Well, let's talk about the benchmark for what should be happening in any administration. There should be one message. You should be able that the control of the messaging from the White House on down to make sure that the State Department's singing from the same sheet of music, the DOD's singing from the same sheet of music. That's what you expect. What we have with Donald Trump is a multiple personality disorder, where out of his mouth are coming complete opposite things, and out of his administration. So first we heard, it was a great meeting. Then the very same day, Trump, I'm really disappointed in Putin. Now, which was it? Was it a great meeting, or are you really disappointed? That the Russians waited foolishly, I think. They had agreed with Witkoff, okay, we won't tell what happened in our conversation until you have a chance to brief Trump. And then the Trump team got out there and said, yeah, those Russians begged for the meeting with us. No, they didn't. It was just the opposite. It was the United States that begged for the meeting. That's why Witkoff went to Moscow. It wasn't Moscow going to Washington. And that's number one. Then finally, after the U.S. is talking this up, talking about the results of the meeting from their spin, the Russians come out and say, no, it was the U.S. came and said, hey, they'd want to have a meeting with a bilateral session with Trump and Putin. So we agreed to that. And then the word leaked out that it was going to be United Arab Emirates. And then the United States comes out and says, oh, no, we haven't agreed to that. And then the U.S. put out the demand as well that, you're going to have to, Putin's going to have to meet with Zelensky as well. And the Russians are saying, no, that's a non-starter. And then Trump says, well, not necessarily, so it's all over it's a mess. And I don't think the meeting will come off. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but even if it comes off, it's not going to bring about a ceasefire unless the conditions that Vladimir Putin has repeatedly laid out, along with Sergei Lavrov and Sergei Rybkov, the number 2 man in the foreign ministry, and Peskov, the spokesman for Putin, and Maria Zakharova, the press spokeswoman for the foreign ministry. It's been repeated over and over and over what the conditions are. And Ukraine's not going to accept those. And if those aren't accepted, Russia's not going to accept a ceasefire. And yet the Trump administration keeps spreading the lie that, oh yeah, it looks like we've got to deal with Russia for a ceasefire. The only conditions under which there would be a ceasefire is if Ukrainian troops withdraw immediately from the 4 oblasts, former oblasts of Ukraine that are now republics of Russia, and an end to any NATO ambitions and pulling NATO out of Ukraine, and an end to Western military support, and elections in Ukraine, a commitment for new elections. And then at that point, Russia would be willing to entertain a ceasefire. But until that happens, there's not going to be a ceasefire. This war will continue. The problem, I think, I worry that the Russians are being too naive. And in my piece at sonar21.com last night, I likened Putin to Charlie Brown, an intelligent Charlie Brown. But nonetheless, in the cartoon written by George Schultz, there was always this meme of Charlie Brown wanting to kick the football, Lucy holding the football. And every time Charlie Brown would run up to kick it, she'd pull it away. He would kick empty air and fall on his ass. Well, how many times do you have to be lied to by the United States to understand Trump's not telling the truth? They're not at all interested in seeking a peaceful agreement in Ukraine that leaves Russia intact. Because just today, here's Trump hosting Armenia and Azerbaijan to sign a peace agreement and work out some bilateral agreements with them. It has nothing to do with peace. This is all about putting pressure on Russia in the Southern Caucasus, as well as pressure on Iran. This is not a good diplomatic move where the United States is trying to be the adult in the room. This is part of a broader strategy to destroy Russia. And until the Russian people understand that, they're going to keep being Charlie Brown.
Yeah. Colonel, Larry just mentioned what Donald Trump said after tweeting that it was a positive meeting between Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin. And Larry just mentioned that. Here is what Donald Trump said.
For Vladimir Putin agreeing to a ceasefire still stand tomorrow? Or is that fluid now that talks are... What? Is your deadline still standing for Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire tomorrow? Or is that fluid now?
It's going to be up to him. We're going to see what he has to say. It's going to be up to him. Very disappointed, yeah.
It seems we are dealing with some sort of political bipolarity, and it is some sort of bipolarity.
Yeah. Let me give you a little bit of a lecture. Okay. I taught this for 16 years on 2 college campuses with some brilliant students who did case study after case study. In 1948, we passed a National Security Act with some modifications by 50 it had gone into practice. It's been in practice ever since. There have been some amendments. There have been some changes. That act established, among other things, the CIA. Truman hated that, and the National Security Council. The National Security Council was to be an instrument of decision-making that would prevent a Franklin Roosevelt from ever coming again. That was some of the motivation behind it. In some ways, every president since then, and this is what I talked, used that process. They used it in different ways. They used it in the statutory way. The National Security Council met, debated, discussed in front of the President of the United States, who then made a decision on the critical issue confronting him, or went away to think about it and came back and made a decision. Or presidents like Nixon and Kissinger went around the statutory system, but nonetheless had competent people doing that. Kissinger's opening to China, a case in point. Other things, maybe not so good. Other presidents have done other things. My president, George W. Bush, let his vice president run the whole decision-making process while the NSC met perfunctorily and heard other people. What's happening here, and the person responsible for negotiating all this and making it work and supervising it and taking no position himself or herself unless the president asks for it, is the National Security Advisor. Okay, fast forward to Donald Trump. We have no National Security Advisor. We have no National Security Council. We have no Secretary of State. We have no real Secretary of Defense. We have no real cabinet. What we have is buffoons, clowns, operating within the system designed for serious national security decision-making. The man doing all the fabricating of the word that comes out is an idiot named Donald Trump. No one is coordinating. Marco Rubio is not a national security advisor. He is not going over that whole process and disciplining it and making sure the system is either around the statutory system, like Kissinger and Nixon, or is in the statutory system, most brilliantly demonstrated by George H.W. Bush with the Gang of Eight and the people who made the best decision-making process in the history of the act, some 60 years or so. There is nothing of that today. We are simply making decisions out of Donald Trump's head on a daily, even an hourly basis. There is no cabinet. There is no discussion. There's no national security advisor bringing discipline to a system. There is just chaos. And Donald is at the center of that chaos. And now he's got the Epstein crisis that he wants to divert his base's attention from. Watch out.
Larry, adding to what you've said about Donald Trump, and he signed secondary tariffs on India as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Look, let me explain this to you, Nima. This is Trump. Trump's going to win the Nobel Peace Prize because of this. Because of his action against India, he's now brought India and China together in a cooperative relationship that they've never had. They've been adversaries. So he's actually helped achieve peace between two countries. So we've got to give him credit. Sorry.
Now actually, we have India, China, and Russia.
Yeah, man. Peacemaker.
Actually, Modi tweeted that he had a very good and detailed conversation with Vladimir Putin, and he said, "I thank him, and we are going to deepen. They're going to deepen the India-Russia special, and they're talking about the economic ties between the two nations. They're going to deepen the ties." But do you feel that somehow Colonel Donald Trump feels that this was a sign to send to Russia to agree with Witkoff? That's why the same day, because the same day that Witkoff was talking with Vladimir Putin, he signed the secondary tariffs against Russia, and feeling that it would put some sort of, in my opinion, some sort of pressure on Russia. But it doesn't seem that would be the case for Russia.
I don't think it's the case. Is that for me or for?
Yeah, it is for you, Colonel.
I don't think that's the case. As I said, I think Witkoff, when presidents turn to special envoys, they don't trust their secretaries of state, or they have a bone to pick with their secretary of state in that particular area they appoint a special envoy for. Colin Powell told George W. Bush when he assumed the secretariat, I will have no special envoys, period. I'll walk out the door if you appoint a special envoy. And George W. Bush said, I understand. Because he understood, having been National Security Advisor, Deputy National Security Advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that special envoys are a dysfunction in the arrangement of power and the decision-making process. Well, Witkoff is even worse because he's a billionaire real estate agent and he has no idea what diplomacy is. And I was kind of easy on him at first because he's the only one that seemed like he had some character and some ability to listen and some empathy. But now I'm not easy on him anymore because I realize he's just a damn real estate billionaire. And you do not do diplomacy like you do real estate deals, particularly if your role model is Donald J. Trump. And that's what he's for. Rubio is not a Secretary of State. Hegseth is a sycophant at the Defense Department, the two most important cabinet officers in the U.S. establishment. And I go back to my previous lecture on Donald Trump being the arbiter, some arbiter.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things with this tariff on India, the joking aside, is number one, the Trump team didn't do their homework. India's trade with the United States accounts for about 2% of its gross domestic product. Okay. That's nothing. I mean, it'd be one thing if it was 10% or 20%. Okay, that could have a pretty serious economic impact. The projections out there are that this is going to reduce India's economic growth by 0.19%, not 19%, less than 1%, 0.19%, negligible. But what it has achieved is enraging the population in India in the same way that Trump's moves against Brazil have enraged the Brazilian population.
Yes.
And then it's enraging the Chinese population. This is, while this is presented as an effort, punishment of India for its buying Russian oil, because Trump signed an executive order where he declared Russia is a national security threat. And therefore, we're going to punish India because Russia is a national security threat. That's bureaucratic speak for calling Russia an enemy. He's doing that the same day that they're supposed to get together with Putin to talk. Now, this really, I think, has more to do with BRICS, that the economic threat now that BRICS poses is genuine and it's real because countries like Brazil, like India and China are increasingly moving away from doing transactions in dollars. So you've got this huge supply of dollars floating around the world and the demand for it is falling. Well, what happens when you have large supply, low demand? The price keeps going down. And that's why you're seeing the dollar dropping in value right now. And so Trump's effort to try to get a hold of this is, okay, impose the tariffs on India. And what did India do? They've canceled the visit of their defense minister to the United States. They've canceled an order for F-35s. They've canceled an order for some other planes. They're going to buy from China and Russia. And so instead of splitting BRICS, God, Trump's become, maybe they secretly hired him to become the world ambassador for BRICS, to bring BRICS together. Donald Trump. That's what he's accomplished.
I always said he was somebody's agent.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, Neiman, some of the most exquisitely difficult and fairly successful diplomacy the United States has conducted in the last 20 years was that which it conducted with India. I knew the two men who were largely responsible for that diplomacy fairly well. And we did some things we didn't really want to do with India's nuclear program because we knew if we gave them everything that they wanted, it would make its way over into the military program. And we didn't want that to happen. We didn't want to be responsible for it. We knew it'd probably happen anyway. But so all of that is now, I think, negated. All of it is negated. We also were building a fairly powerful relationship with the Indian Navy. The Indian Navy, one of the senior people in it actually looked at me one day and said, "I'd rather sail with you than anyone else. But my government in Delhi doesn't want me to, so I have to be very careful." So we were doing increasing exercises with the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. And they were taking some of the burden off of us for that. All manner of things were happening positively. We just killed all that. We just killed it all. I don't think Modi or any Indian leader now will pick up the pieces anytime soon, certainly not if Trump is president.
Larry, I think that's huge that they don't want to buy weapons from the United States anymore.
Well, they did. They did. I'm addressing it to Larry, but they wanted to divest a little bit of the Russian weaponry. One of the reasons was because Pakistan showed them the U.S. acquired equipment, especially F-16s, were better than what they were getting from their side of the coin. Not that the Russians don't have equivalent airplanes, and even better, but they weren't selling them to the Indians. So the talks we had with the Indians about diversifying their arms sales were looking pretty good. That's dead too.
I don't know what would be the reaction, Larry, on the part of the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself, hearing that India is not interested in buying weapons.
Well, I mean, again, Trump has thought he could. Remember, he genuinely believes, still believes, despite evidence to the contrary, that the tariffs are working, that the tariffs are bringing in billions of dollars, and it's strengthening the economy. One of the things that happened yesterday was there was was it $100 billion sale of T-bills for short term for 4 weeks. This is like an emergency move, but this is where the Treasury's going, because they've got this debt looming over, and they've got to make the interest payments. And so this is why Trump is talking to Powell, or putting pressure on Jerome Powell at the Fed to lower the interest rate, because they want to lower what the United States has to pay to all this foreign borrowing. The problem with that is if you lower that interest rate, it's also likely to stimulate demand, consumer demand in the United States, works its way through the system, which is, if the economy is already performing well, then that's going to heat the economy up and add to inflation. Yep. And so, I mean, they're really caught between, the proverbial dog and the fire plug. They can't avoid getting pissed on. And so you've got that as the backstory. And yet the tariffs, the damage that the tariffs are going to do, we're going to find out end of August, 1st of September. I had lunch yesterday with a good friend who's an importer of vitamin supplements made in China. And, he was laying out for me what's happened, over the last 6 months and what's going to happen going forward. He can no longer get those vitamins. The supply chains are seizing up, they're freezing. What happened in February when Trump first announced these tariffs is everybody, like my friend, went out and bought huge inventory. They extended their lines of credit in order to get the inventory and put it in warehouses so that they would not be subject to the tariff. But now, because of the uncertainty about exactly who's going to get tariffed at what rate, the producers, they're holding off. At the same time, you've got supply chains out of China for other reasons, particularly with rare earth minerals and magnets that are drying up, that the defense industry doesn't have a replacement for. So Trump is really creating the potential for a major economic crisis that will hit, I anticipate, September, early October, and it's going to be bad.
This is why I say if he's not demented, he is somebody's agent.
Yeah, yeah.
Colonel, if you were to mention the best and worst case scenarios of the meeting, the outcome of the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, what would you draw for us? What is the best and the worst case?
I may be proven absolutely wrong. I don't think it'll take place. If it does take place, and it takes place with only those two people and whomever Trump brings and whomever Putin brings, then Trump will have to come out and spin it, and he will fail in spinning it, even with his own base. And then I wonder where we are. I was watching your interview, as I told you, with the German journalist, and I think he's absolutely right. We might be sitting here in a week or two looking at the beginning, the real beginning of World War III.
Yeah.
Larry, your take, how do you find it? What can Donald Trump get within the limits that he has, within the information? We know that he's limited in terms of information, what's going on in Ukraine. He was talking about the casualties. He was talking about the people, the government in Ukraine is sending to the battlefield more than 60 years old and more than that. And he didn't know any of that. And
well,
go ahead.
He's living up to his reputation for not reading, number one. But we can't excuse the intelligence community for not telling him the truth. Particularly on the casualty front, we've got, I think, evidence, courtesy of Seymour Hersh, who we heard from an intelligence official claiming that the Ukrainians had suffered 2 million casualties. Well, it's just not true. And so if Psy is hearing that from a U.S. intelligence official, then that's exactly what the intelligence community is telling Trump. So it may not be totally Trump's fault that he's been given false, misleading information. Go ahead.
I was just going to say what the German journalist said this morning, which even I thought I knew the statistics, but I think he's probably onto something. Total KIAs were 1.4 million. Of that, 1 million are Ukrainian, and somewhere between 200 and 300,000 are Russian.
Yeah, I think the actual, I did a projection based upon, went through recruitment, both the ones who were drafted as well as the ones who signed contracts, and then did a projection. It looks like Russia has suffered probably close, and this is based on Media Zona's work, where they go through and call the obituaries in Russia and all the different republics. About 160,000 Russians dead, and then projecting it, four casualties for every one dead. You come up with probably a total 600,000 casualties on the Russian side. But on the Ukrainian side, they're probably between killed and wounded, well in excess of 2.5 million.
Yeah, if it's 1.4 million KIA per the German journalist, then it's got to be at least 2 or 3 times that. I would say even more, although the Ukrainians don't have the sophisticated battlefield recovery techniques that the Russians do. It's got to be 2 or 3 times at least that in terms of total casualties.
Right.
And you got to remember, not most, but I would say a high percentage of those WIAs aren't going back. That's a lost leg, a lost arm, whatever.
Right. Yeah. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry for that. And what does Trump want from? Because if we assume the level of information that Donald Trump has possessed during the meeting, that Vladimir Putin doesn't have any problem to explain all of that for Donald Trump, but Donald Trump doesn't have the patience to listen to him. And the other thing would be, what would Vladimir Putin, what does he want from Donald Trump in terms of Zelensky? Is Zelensky the case for Russia to be the president to continue as the president of Ukraine as time goes by, or he wants someone else? He wants some sort of election in Ukraine going forward, because that would, I think they're going to talk about it in the meeting. if that happens?
Who's that for?
It's for you.
Oh, for me. No, look, Putin, this isn't about Ukraine. This is about NATO. Putin has repeatedly said they got to address the root causes. The root cause is NATO's expansion to the east, and NATO's funding of the war, NATO's provision of intelligence and weapons and money. That's what's got to come to an end. Zelensky is just a symptom of the problem, and Putin's insistence on elections in Ukraine is just simply acknowledging the fact that anything that Zelensky would sign would not be legally binding under international law, and Putin still is a lawyer at heart. So, but again, I'm skeptical that despite the claims that they've agreed and there will be this meeting, I'm skeptical that it's going to come off.
Yeah, it seems.
Yeah, so am I. I can't imagine how Trump would come out of this looking better than when he went in.
Yeah.
But Carl, do you feel that he's receiving pressure from Europe, Donald Trump?
Maybe, but I don't see that. After listening to that German journalist you interviewed this morning, and listening to a couple of other people, one in Munich and one in Stuttgart, I think there's a lot of pressure from certain leaders, but the pressure washes off Donald Trump's back. He doesn't listen to it. He doesn't say a word. And basically, I think the journalist is right about those being, what did he say? He used a really brilliant term, transatlanticized or something like that. and his term about, I wrote this down, his term about propaganda media, absolutely accurate. But what he doesn't know is we've been buying that media since 2002 through U.S. aid and through other CIA mechanisms, never the agency doing it or rarely doing it. We've been buying those editors. We've been buying those journalists. So they are putting out in European media our propaganda. It was the same thing we did in Chile in a very small way, not for Chile and not for Allende, but we bought up all the media that counted in Chile, and we put in that media editors and journalists who just went on and on about how terrible a communist Allende was. We learned how to do these things, but we don't do them directly anymore. We use liberal democratic institutions, quote unquote, to do it. Like USAID, like IRI, like NDI, like all these institutions that are selling liberal democracy. What they're selling is the propaganda of the United States.
Larry, the other bad sign about the meeting between the future meeting, if that happens, between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin would be the way that Europe somehow tried to do everything to satisfy Donald Trump. And right now in the meeting, they want to see, they want to know what would happen. They want to, whatever comes out of the meeting, they want to benefit from that argument, from that discussion between the two presidents. Is that coming for Europe?
Well, let me say, this got to be my final comment because I've got another commitment here in 4 minutes. Europe is desperate to keep the United States engaged in this war because Europe knows that on left to itself, it does not have the manpower, does not have the industrial capability to continue to sustain operations. And while they talk about being fearful of a Russian attack upon Europe, which is just idiotic, this really is about money. And this is about the financial interests of European banks. And particularly bets that they've placed.
Bingo.
Yeah, bets that they've placed in Ukraine. And that's falling apart now. And they're hoping that, they see the United States as their insurance policy to protect against that default. But the defeat of Ukraine by Russia is, I think, going to be accompanied by an economic collapse in Europe. So that's where we're headed. And that's why the Europeans are panicked at the thought that Trump's going to sit down and talk to Putin.
Yeah. Thank you.
There are historical precedents for this, maybe not quite to this scope and depth of profound incompetence, but everyone was making money off Hitler in the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
As he tested out his, blitzkrieg, including us, the United States of America.
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to continue just a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine. I apologize for having to drop out, but it's always a pleasure with Colonel Wilkerson.
You just reminded me I got to go at noon too, so I'll be right after you.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Colonel, just to wrap up this session, if you were to summarize what has happened during this administration so far, in terms of the Middle East, in terms of the conflict in Ukraine, how do you see? We know that we both had some sort of hope in the new administration. We thought that they're going to change something. And do you think that sort of hope is fading away?
Well, my greatest hope was with regard to Ukraine, as I think you know. And I thought what he said was pretty perceptive. And he was a new guy on the block, as it were, even though he'd been president during some of the run up to the perfidy that caused it in the first place. Nonetheless, I thought he meant what he meant, what he said, that he was going to stop it. Maybe not in 24 hours, but he was going to stop it. That's a tremendous disappointment because he has failed spectacularly there. With Gaza, I expected what's happening simply because, as you know, I believe we're using Israel, not the other way around. We use the other way around as camouflage because what we want to do is what Lindsey Graham says we want to do. We want to kill everybody in sight in the Levant so that our soldiers don't have to do it. And that's putting a fine touch on it, if you will. But nonetheless, we would be happy if all those people were dead or absolutely subservient to us. The way we saw, I think, with some exception, the Iranians were under the Shah. We'd like to have that everywhere. And that's what we use Israel for. And we're using them with respect to Syria and other places like that now. You didn't mention where I fear the most what Donald Trump has done, and that's domestic. I think we are really falling apart domestically. I just heard this morning, now back up to my administration, the Bush administration. I had a really catastrophic meeting in a lobby of a building right after the president had spoken to a few of us, when a friend of mine from Justice said, all the lawyers are leaving. Are you kidding me? What do you mean all the good lawyers are leaving? Because of the attorney general. He was a jerk. And Bush had put him in there. I just heard this morning that 2/3 of the lawyers at Justice are either gone, are leaving, or have said they're leaving. That's catastrophic because of who's going to replace them. Bondi's buddies are going to replace them. This is disassembling the Justice Department of the United States. We've already disassembled the FBI. The FBI is broken, totally broken. And Kash Patel is presiding over an agency that he loves because it's broken. Domestically, we are in serious trouble of maintaining our republic. And I'm not so much worried about an actual coup as I am the freaking place collapsing because of the incompetence in all of the different places. And in that collapse will come these billionaires who want to establish a technocracy. And we might have a very carefully orchestrated coup. And we might have this board of technocrats whom Elon Musk, for example, and Peter Thiel, for example, and Charles Koch, for example, want to actually run this country from now on because they feel that would be much more efficient. It probably would be, and much more effective. It would not be, except for their purposes. So we're getting ready to fall apart in both dimensions, internationally and domestically. And that is grave concern. And Trump has brought it to a head.
Here is, before wrapping up, here is Pam Bondi going after Maduro.
The Department of Justice and State Department are announcing a historic $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. Maduro uses foreign terrorist organizations like TDA, Sinaloa, and Cartel of the Suns to bring deadly drugs and violence into our country. To date, the DEA has seized 30 tons of cocaine linked to Maduro and his associates, with nearly 7 tons linked to Maduro himself, which represents a primary source of income for the deadly cartels based in Venezuela and Mexico. Cocaine is often laced with fentanyl, resulting in the loss and destruction of countless American lives. The DOJ has seized over $700 million of Maduro-linked assets, including 2 private jets, 9 vehicles, and more. Yet Maduro's reign of terror continues. He is one of the largest narco-traffickers in the world and a threat to our national security. Therefore, we've doubled his reward to $50 million. Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes. If you have any information to bring this criminal to justice, call 1-202-3...
This is, of course, a bloated chapter out of George Herbert Walker Bush's portfolio, and the largest drug bust in history. No, not drug bust in history, against Noriega in Panama. This is exactly what they're doing, only now they're taking on a much bigger state, a much more wealthy state in terms of its oil reserves. And that's the real reason behind their doing it, not cocaine. As a matter of fact, I have it on good authority that cocaine is probably the least problem right now in terms of illicit drugs. Still a problem, is probably the least problem. The heroin coming out of Afghanistan, because of our little adventures in Afghanistan, is dwarfing that in some respects. And fentanyl, of course, is a real problem. I also heard this morning, and I think it's verified in the New York Times, I was trying to look at, that Trump has ordered the United States military to go after drug lords all over the globe. Ordered them to. So I can just see Hegseth sitting down at his table and saying, whom are we going after first? And of course, it'll be Mexico, I expect. We're declaring war on the world. That's what we're doing. $10 trillion U.S., Nima. $10 trillion flows through illicit trafficking in people, especially children and women, illicit drugs, and automobiles. $10 trillion annually in the black economy. Now we're taking on that with the American military. That's what she's saying. They're trying to deflect people's attention away from Epstein first and Gaza second. That's what they're trying to do. And now they're going to have a third thing to deflect people's attention away from, a non-existent meeting declared so by Trump, I'm not going, or a meeting that doesn't do anything but negative for him. Then they'll be trying the same thing with that. This is the empire falling apart much faster than I thought it would. What a spokesperson for that, too. I mean, you know anything about her past, you want to go, how on earth did you ever get to where you are? Well, the only answer is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
In Brazil, you must go, oh my God.
Yeah. Lula has made his mind, and he knows where would be the direction.
Yeah. I fear for Lula with respect to what she just said. You know, Maduro, Lula.
Yeah, they're gonna go. They're gonna come after Lula. But let's see.
We're crazy. We're crazy, Nima. We're crazy. We've gone to the loony bin, but we're still dangerous.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl.
Sure.
Great pleasure.
I enjoyed the Larry Squared this morning.
Yeah. I enjoyed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Take care.
See you soon, Carl.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.